The sermon that refuses to die. Imagine hearing a speech so powerful that people are still debating it 20 centuries later. Not a speech delivered in a palace. Not a speech backed by armies. Not a speech broadcast across the world. Just a man sitting on a hillside, speaking to a crowd. And yet, thousands of years later, those words continue to influence laws, inspire movements, shape cultures, and challenge ordinary people. What made this sermon different from the countless speeches that history forgot? To answer that question, we need to travel back nearly 2,000 years. Picture the scene. The Roman Empire rules much of the known world. Most people live difficult lives. Many struggle to survive. The powerful seem untouchable. The poor feel overlooked. And in a region called Galilee, a crowd begins gathering around a teacher named Jesus. Word has spread quickly. People have heard stories. Stories of healing. Stories of miracles. Stories of a man speaking with unusual authority. Curious men and women leave their homes and follow him to a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Some hope to witness something extraordinary. Others are searching for answers. Many are simply wondering who this man really is. Then Jesus sits down. The crowd grows silent. And what follows becomes one of the most influential speeches in human history. But here's what makes it remarkable. Jesus doesn't begin by praising the rich. He doesn't celebrate political power. He doesn't admire military strength. Instead, he starts with words that must have shocked nearly everyone listening. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Imagine hearing that for the first time. The world tells people that strength wins, that wealth matters, that influence determines success. Yet Jesus appears to be describing an entirely different way of seeing life. The crowd expected a message about power. Instead, they heard a message about humility. And the surprises were only beginning. Because after describing the blessed, Jesus turned to the people gathered before him and gave them an unexpected identity. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. At first glance, these phrases sound simple. But to the people listening, they carried enormous meaning. Salt preserved what would otherwise decay. Light revealed what darkness concealed. In other words, Jesus wasn't telling people to withdraw from the world. He was telling them they mattered within it, that their actions could influence others, that even ordinary lives possess extraordinary significance. And perhaps that's one reason these teachings still resonate today. Because deep down, most people want to know that their lives matter, that their choices matter, that their existence has purpose. But then the sermon takes an even more challenging turn. Jesus begins speaking about anger. Not violence. Not murder. Anger, because he points to something many people overlook. The greatest conflicts rarely begin with dramatic actions. They begin much earlier. With resentment. With bitterness. With wounds left unresolved. It's like a small spark landing in dry grass. The spark seems insignificant. The wildfire does not. And according to Jesus, dealing with the spark matters just as much as dealing with the fire. For the crowd listening, this was a radical idea. For modern audiences, it may be even more relevant. Because despite all our technology, people still struggle with the same emotions. The same anger. The same pride. The same fears. The same desire to be understood. The same temptation to judge. Human history changes. Human nature changes far more slowly. And this realization lies at the heart of the Sermon on the Mount. It isn't merely a collection of rules. It is an exploration of the human condition itself. And as the sermon continues, Jesus says something that many consider one of the most difficult teachings ever spoken. Love your enemies. Not tolerate them. Not ignore them. Love them. The crowd must have been stunned. Because this wasn't simply a challenge to behavior. It was a challenge to instinct, to the natural desire for revenge, to the cycle of hatred that has fueled conflicts throughout history. Yet Jesus proposes an alternative path, one that remains controversial even today. And the deeper he goes, the more uncomfortable the sermon becomes. Because eventually, he begins addressing something nearly every person has experienced. And what he says next may be one of the reasons people still return to this sermon after 2,000 years. Imagine a father worried about feeding his family, a farmer worried about the next harvest, a merchant worried about losing everything, a mother worried about her children. Different lives, different circumstances, the same emotion. Fear of the future. Jesus looks at the crowd and asks a question that seems almost disarmingly simple. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? The question forces people to stop and think. Because worry feels productive. It feels like preparation. It feels like control. Yet often it accomplishes none of those things. Instead, it consumes energy. It steals peace. It keeps the mind trapped in possibilities that may never happen. Jesus isn't suggesting that people ignore responsibility. The farmers still need to plant. The workers still need to work. Parents still need to care for their families. But he draws a distinction between responsibility and obsession, between planning and panic, between wisdom and fear. And perhaps that's why these words continue to resonate. Because despite all our advancements, anxiety remains one of the defining struggles of modern life. People can communicate across continents in seconds, access more information than entire civilizations once possessed, solve problems previous generations couldn't imagine. Yet many still lie awake at night worrying about tomorrow. The details have changed. The feeling hasn't. And then Jesus turns toward another issue that affects nearly everyone. Judgment. Not the kind delivered by courts. The kind delivered by people. The opinions. The assumptions. The criticism. The conclusions we form about others. Jesus says, "Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own?" The crowd likely smiled. The image is almost humorous. A person obsessing over a tiny flaw in someone else while carrying a massive flaw themselves. Yet beneath the humor lies a serious truth. Human beings often find it easier to examine others than themselves. It's easier to criticize than to improve. Easier to condemn than to understand. Easier to point fingers than to accept responsibility. And nowhere is this more visible than in today's world. Every day, millions of people judge strangers they have never met. A single moment becomes a permanent label. A mistake becomes an identity. A disagreement becomes a reason for hostility. The sermon challenges that instinct, not by denying the existence of right and wrong, but by encouraging humility before criticism, because self-awareness is often the first step toward wisdom. Then Jesus presents what many consider the most famous ethical principle ever spoken. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. Today we call it the Golden Rule. Its simplicity is part of its power. Anyone can understand it. A child can understand it. A scholar can understand it. A king can understand it. But understanding it and living it are very different things. Imagine every conversation being filtered through that principle. Every argument, every business deal, every political debate, every family disagreement. Treat others the way you would want to be treated. The idea sounds simple, yet if practiced consistently, it would transform countless relationships. And perhaps that's why the Golden Rule appears in discussions about ethics even today. Because it speaks to something universal. The desire to be treated with dignity, respect, fairness, compassion. Things every human being understands. But as the sermon approaches its conclusion, Jesus says something that brings all the previous teachings together. He tells a story. A simple story. Two builders. One builds his house upon rock. The other builds his house upon sand. At first, both houses appear similar. Both stand tall. Both seem secure. Both look successful. Then the storm arrives. Rain falls. Winds blow. Floodwaters rise. And suddenly the foundation matters. The house built on sand collapses. The house built on rock remains standing. It's a simple image, yet it contains a profound message. Because life eventually brings storms to everyone. Failure, loss, disappointment, unexpected change. No amount of wealth, status, intelligence, or influence can completely prevent them. The question isn't whether storms will come. The question is what foundation exists beneath the surface. And according to Jesus, hearing wise words isn't enough. The difference lies in what people do with them. Knowledge alone doesn't create stability. Application does. The crowd listening that day had heard many teachers, many opinions, many philosophies. But Jesus was asking something more difficult than agreement. He was asking for transformation. Now imagine the crowd as the sermon comes to an end. 4 hours they had listened. Some were inspired. Some were challenged. Some were probably confused. Others may have been uncomfortable. Because the sermon didn't simply offer information. It demanded reflection. It forced people to examine themselves, their motives, their relationships, their priorities, their character. And perhaps that's one reason it has endured. Most speeches tell people what to think. The Sermon on the Mount asks people who they are becoming. That's a very different question, and it remains relevant no matter the century. Think about our world today. Technology has transformed nearly everything. We carry devices more powerful than the computers that once guided spacecraft. We communicate instantly across the globe. We live in an age previous generations could barely imagine. Yet beneath all of that, the same human struggles remain. People still search for meaning. People still wrestle with anger. People still fear the future. People still seek approval. People still struggle with forgiveness. People still wonder what truly matters. The setting changed. The questions did not. And that may be the reason this sermon continues to survive while countless other speeches faded into history. Because it speaks directly to realities every generation encounters. Not temporary trends. Not political moments. Not passing fashions. Human realities. Timeless realities. So why does a speech delivered on a hillside nearly 2,000 years ago continue to capture attention? Maybe because it addresses the deepest questions people continue asking. What is a good life? How should we treat others? How do we deal with fear? How do we respond to hatred? What gives life meaning? Where can lasting peace be found? Every generation asks those questions. And every generation discovers that easy answers rarely satisfy. The Sermon on the Mount doesn't promise an easy life. It doesn't promise wealth. It doesn't promise power. It doesn't promise comfort. Instead, it offers a vision of character. Humility over pride. Mercy over revenge. Integrity over appearance. Trust over anxiety. Love over hatred. Whether someone approaches these teachings through faith, history, philosophy, or simple curiosity, one fact remains difficult to ignore. Very few speeches continue shaping conversations after 20 centuries. Very few continue influencing hearts, minds, cultures, and civilizations. This one does. The mountain is quiet now. The crowd is long gone. The Roman Empire has fallen. Kingdoms have risen and disappeared. Generations have come and gone. Yet somehow, the words spoken on that hillside continue to echo through history.